Today we're out here near Nashville taking a look at the all-new 2019 Lexus ES. Back in 1989, the ES and the LS were the two vehicles that helped start the Lexus brand. But they were very different vehicles because the Lexus LS 400 was a rear-wheel drive vehicle designed to compete head-on with the European rear-wheel drive luxury entries, but the ES has always marched to a different drummer. This is a front-wheel drive vehicle. It's about the same price as many of the rear-wheel drive entries from the competition, but it is considerably larger, especially in the rear seat area. So the ES has always sold, of course, on reliability, a core Lexus value, but also value and that big back seat. Now in its 7th generation, Lexus has brought us out here to sample this all-new model. The version that we're driving in this video is the hybrid, so there's also going to be a separate video on the non-hybrid model. Be sure and check that out. Up front, we get the latest iteration of Lexus's spindle grille. That's what they're calling this shape right here. But instead of the horizontal bars that we see in other Lexus models, we get these vertical kinks, very much like the Lexus LS. The design language of the ES and the LS have often been very similar, and this is going back to that for this generation. LED headlamps are standard on all trims, but you actually get two different lamps depending on which trim you get. This model has the up-level 3-module system. They turn in the corners, and the base models do not. We have the signature zigzag right there in that headlamp module, and these are full LED up front. On the front of the car, you'll notice we have that large Lexus logo. That's because it houses a radar sensor. This has Lexus's latest active safety package standard on all trims. That's kind of interesting because there are a lot of vehicles out there that have these safety systems optional, but even in the luxury segment, very few manufacturers make them standard on every vehicle, and Lexus is one of them. The TSS 2.0 system has expanded capabilities over the previous generation system we saw on the last generation Lexus ES. As is the trend with luxury vehicles, this is larger than the outgoing model by 2.6 inches. This now comes in at 195.9 inches long. This is actually about 2 inches longer than a Mercedes-Benz E-Class. And that's weirdly what I mean about this marching to a different drummer than the European competition. Because there are European front-wheel drive entries. The Audi A4, for instance, in the same price category as this, and the Volvo S60 start as front-wheel drive vehicles. But they're considerably smaller than this because the A4 and the S60 were designed to compete directly with the 3 Series and the C-Class, and the Lexus ES wasn't really, because the Lexus competitor to the C-Class and the 3 Series is the Lexus IS. But the ES has a different mission. This is giving you 4 inches more rear legroom than we find in a Mercedes-Benz E-Class for a price tag that's about the same as a Mercedes-Benz C-Class. Out back, the rear end styling again mimics the rest of the Lexus lineup. We have these tail lamp modules that extend quite far on the side of the body. Spoiler right here on the trunk lid, and since we're in the hybrid model, we don't have visible exhaust tips. They're tucked there under the bumper. Most of the ES models you'll see on the dealer lot will have a 3.5-liter V6 under the hood, but the hybrid uses instead a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine. This produces 176 horsepower on its own, and when coupled with the all-new 4th-generation Lexus hybrid system, gives you 215 horsepower. That's about a 15 horsepower increase over last year. Lexus does not give us a combined torque figure, but I suspect it's somewhere around 200 pound-feet of torque or so. That's good enough to get you from 0 to 60 in around 8 seconds. That's about a second and a half slower than the 3.5-liter V6 equipped model. On the bright side, this gives you class-leading fuel economy. Class-leading fuel economy can, of course, be a tricky claim sometimes, but it's actually pretty easy with the Lexus, because at 44 miles per gallon combined, this is actually the most efficient luxury car sold in America that runs on gasoline and doesn't have a plug. So you will get better fuel economy, theoretically, according to the EPA cycle, if you plugged in, for instance, a BMW or a Mercedes or a Volvo plug-in hybrid, but when those vehicles are operating on gasoline, none of them will be as efficient as this model. Lexus seems to prefer regular hybrids to plug-in hybrids, likely because of reliability and, of course, cost control, because we still use a nickel metal hydride battery pack under the rear seats. Some people have been asking me why Toyota and Lexus continue to use nickel metal packs in their vehicles. There are actually 2 reasons. The first, obviously, is cost. It's going to be a little bit less expensive than a lithium-ion pack. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the other answer is actually longevity and reliability. Nickel battery packs tend to have better power dissipation characteristics on smaller packs like this. They also seem to have longer and more reliable lifetimes. So that's why we find them in the Lexus ES and other Toyota and Lexus vehicles. Front seat comfort is quite good. The model that we're driving has the extending thigh cushion option. We also have 4-way adjustable lumbar support on the driver's side, and of course, an electric tilt telescopic steering column that's linked to the 3-position memory over there on the driver's side. Now, it is worth noting that we don't have the same range of motion on the passenger seat as on the driver's seat. It is lacking the extending thigh cushion and the 4-way lumbar support. It only gets a 2-way lumbar over there on that side. These seats are very comfortable when compared against the mainstream competitor for the ES Hybrid, which is of course the Mkz Hybrid. But if you were to compare this to some of the European entries, you will find more comfortable seats in them, especially this passenger seat, which would have the same range of motion as the driver's seat, especially in Mercedes and Volvo models. Hopping into the back, we have an enormous amount of legroom, and that's all thanks to that front-wheel drive engine design and of course the overall size of the ES. Sitting very comfortably behind myself, you can see I have about 6 inches of legroom left. Now, unfortunately, the position of the battery in this hybrid vehicle means that I don't have as much headroom as the regular Avalon. And for me, at 6 feet tall, that is the difference between being able to sit upright in this rear seat area and not being able to without your head touching the ceiling. In the regular Avalon, sitting all the way back in this seat with my head right there on that adjustable headrest, my head is touching the ceiling, but I don't have to cock my head to one side in order to sit back here. In the Lexus ES, if I want my head all the way back, then I do have to be a little bit to that side. However, if you are slouching a little bit, or if you don't generally sit all the way back, it's probably not going to be too much of a problem. That is a little bit disappointing because there is so much legroom in this vehicle. This front seat is all the way back in its track, suitable for a taller driver up front. You can see I still have about 4 inches of legroom left or so. But this problem is not unique to the Lexus ES, of course. Many modern luxury sedans, in the pursuit of better fuel economy and of course the sexier side profile, have really reduced rear headroom versus some of the older models. You'll definitely notice that if I move on over to the middle seat where it is higher off the ground, so my head is definitely digging into that rear ceiling. You might be wondering, what's the point of all this rear seat legroom if we don't have the headroom to match? Actually, I would say child seats are the reason for this, because if you're looking to put rear-facing child seats, which is what you have to put infants in these days, in the back of the vehicle, then this legroom is a huge benefit. And I suspect you'd actually be able to put a rear-facing child seat behind me at 6 feet tall very easily in this vehicle. So if you do need to do that, this is going to be a much better option than something like a Lexus IS or a BMW 3 Series. Rear seat passengers also get a softly padded center armrest, although it is worth noting that we don't have folding rear seat backs at all. These are stationary seat backs, but we do get a small trunk pass-through. One of the big changes for this generation of the ES Hybrid is that the battery is no longer located in the trunk. Instead, it is tucked underneath the rear seats. Now, that does cut rear seat headroom down just a hair, but it means that we have a trunk that is the same size as the non-hybrid model at 16.7 cubic feet. You can see you can fit a lot of bags right in there. This trunk is actually bigger than a Jaguar XJ, which is a full-size luxury sedan, and in the same sort of size range as the BMW 7 Series and Mercedes-Benz S-Class. This is a very, very large trunk. Although you can't close the trunk with a 22-inch roller bag in this position, it does give you an idea as to the height of the cargo area. You could definitely easily put them on their sides. This is all due to the overall packaging efficiency of the front-wheel drive nature of the Lexus ES. Again, that is one of the key differentiators between this and something the same size from Europe, so the E-Class, etc. We get a lot more room inside the vehicle for the overall vehicle length because the hood and everything up front can be made a little bit more compact. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in one of the upper end trims of the hybrid. We have a moonroof right there above the driver and front passengers' heads, and then we find height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and the front passenger. These seats are leather upholstered, and the center section of the seat is perforated because these seats are both heated and ventilated. You can see that we have some minor bolstering there on the seat side cushion and seat bottom cushion. If we move on over to the front door panels, we find all soft touch materials on the upper section and then a little bit of hard plastic right down there at the bottom, right around that bottle holder. Lexus does have some interesting interior treatments here to give a little bit of added visual interest. If I zoom in on this door right here, you'll see this padded section for the armrest has some horizontal stripes to it. That's not the camera deceiving you. Those are actual ridges in that soft touch material that makes up the armrest. It's meant to make it look a little bit more like wood. If we move on over to the plastic section in front of it, you'll also see that we have some texturing there instead of some plain black plastic like we see in some of the competitors. And if we move up the door, this model has the top level Mark Levinson sound system, real wood trim above that, of course, and then stitched material right there above that door handle. Now this stitching is not holding the piece of material together. It actually is just a regular injection molded piece that is then after stitched. That wood trim continues on over to the dashboard. You can see sort of that band that runs here across and then right behind this large infotainment system. The infotainment system is probably the biggest change in this interior in my mind, because as you can see, we now have Apple CarPlay integration. It's worth noting that we do not have Android Auto integration. Lexus has not said when or if that will come to this system. I suspect that it will come over time, but they haven't really said whether you'll be able to upgrade from this version to the version that would support Android Auto later. Of course, if CarPlay isn't really your thing or you don't have an iOS device, we still have app integration via a compatible smartphone. There are built-in apps in this system, and we have Amazon Alexa integration. Of course, we still have a factory mapping interface, and interacting with the system is basically the same as other versions of this Lexus infotainment system. We have the trackpad lower on the dash, which we'll see in a bit, and you move your finger around the screen. Below the infotainment screen, we find two large air vents, the hazard light button, the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system. You'll see we have some textured materials right there as well, more soft touch plastics. Then working our way down from there, we have the controls for the heated and ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, and rear sunshade. And then we have a place where you can put your connected smartphone right there like that. This area is just a little bit too small for my iPhone 7, so you can see that it actually pulls out a little bit of that cup holder. There's a lid that covers that small cubby and cup holder, but because I have a USB device plugged in, we can't actually close that lid. This is where you find the two USB inputs and auxiliary input, but if I close that lid, you'll see that we get more of that real wood trim. We also have a single slot optical disc player in the dashboard. Continuing down from there, we have a pretty traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way back. You enter sport mode by moving it over to the left, push away from the driver for gear up, pull towards the driver for gear down. You return to the drive mode by pushing it over there to that side. Behind the shifter, we have an automatic brake hold button, a small cup holder right there. You can see there's a small bottle of water inside, an EV mode button, and then the input method for that infotainment system. I have to say this is probably my least favorite input method for a modern infotainment system. It's just not as easy to use as some of those click wheel designs or honestly as touchscreen infotainment systems. We do have direct access to the map, menu back button, and then a contextual pop-up button there on the bottom, but everything else you do with this touchpad. You move it around the screen sort of like using a trackpad on a laptop computer, and then you click down to select an option. The system does give you haptic feedback when you click on a particular item. You'll actually feel it tapping in your finger, but it takes a little bit more hand-eye coordination to use this system, I find, than some of the luxury alternatives. Behind that, there's a small wrist rest. Between the front seats, we have a large padded center armrest. It opens on either side right like that, and it reveals a wireless charging mat there. It actually goes a little bit under that center console, so depending on the shape of your phone, you can stick it in horizontally. We have a large storage area behind that, of course, because this is a front-wheel drive vehicle, so there's nothing under this component. You'll also find a 12-volt power port inside. The overall style of the dashboard was intended to mimic what we see in the Lexus LS, so we have this spindle grille shape going on right here for the instrument cluster and control knobs on each side. This is where we control the drive mode. We rotate up for sport, rotate down for eco, press in for normal. Personally, I find the styling of these knobs to be just a little bit unusual. On the left side, we have the traction control off button. We press that in to turn that on and off. These kind of remind me a little bit of Frankenstein's monster's bolts for some reason on the neck. That's exactly what I think of when I first see this, but be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. Everything is very well done. It's just the placement of those that I find a little bit unusual. The instrument cluster is a partial LCD design. We have an 8-inch LCD that's giving us our trip computer information over here, turn-by-turn navigation directions, and some vehicle settings. And then the LCD continues over here behind this physical ring for our power gauge right there, or depending on the mode that you're in, we could also get a tachometer. But if you're in the normal mode or the eco mode, then we get this eco gauge instead. We do have some physical needles over here for engine temperature and of course for the fuel level, but everything else is being delivered on that LCD. The steering wheel has been styled after the wheel that we find in the recently redesigned Lexus LS. The big change between this wheel and previous Lexus wheels is that we have our cruise control buttons on the face, not on a separate stalk that moves with the steering wheel. Since radar adaptive cruise control is standard, we have our distance button right there, lane keeping button, mode button for the infotainment system, as well as track forward, backward. And then on the left side, we have volume up, down, voice command, a phone button, and then buttons that control that multifunction display. Even though this is a hybrid model, we have shift paddles on the back. You'll find down on the left and up on the right. This does imitate a stepped automatic transmission depending on exactly what you're doing. The steering wheel on this model is heated, and it's a little bit difficult to tell on camera, but these are wood inserts right here on the top and on the bottom of the steering wheel. It's a quarter insert, so 3/4 of the wheel is leather, and then this front quarter is wood, but the entire wheel is heated. The biggest difference between the ES and the ES Hybrid out on the road, of course, is the acceleration time. The model that we're driving right here ran from 0 to 60 in 8 seconds out here in Nashville. I expect that's going to be about the same at home because we really aren't that high above sea level. That's about 1/10 of a second faster than the Lexus advertised time, and of course definitely slower than the Lexus ES 350, which has over 300 horsepower out of its V6 under the hood. Quite logically, this is essentially the same hybrid system that we find under the hood of the all-new Avalon Hybrid, which is closely related to the Lexus ES. I get asked a lot about the relationship between the Lexus and its related Toyota counterpart, in this case, the Avalon and the Lexus ES. It only makes sense to share components where it's useful. So we have very similar designs to the crash structures in this vehicle, to the Toyota Avalon. Obviously it shares the hybrid system, and the engine and transmission are common between the vehicles as well. But the Lexus ES's body in white, which is the metal in the vehicle minus the body panels, is not the same as the Avalon, because Lexus was targeting a slightly different buyer with the Lexus, logically, than Toyota is with the Avalon. So we get a stronger body in this vehicle to give it less body flex, less roll out on the road, but also a quieter driving experience. That is definitely noticeable out on the road. In terms of overall absolute handling, this is a little bit better than the Avalon, but it's not going to be that big of a difference because the tire sizes are relatively similar. The model that we're driving has the optional 235 width tires. Base models still use 215 with tires. Those really are going to be the limit to your handling ability. When comparing the ES against other manufacturers' entries, things get a little bit tricky, because what do you compare the Lexus ES to? This is not the same thing as the Mercedes or the BMW or even actually the Volvo entry, even though it's front-wheel drive in this sort of related segment. The truest competitor to the Lexus ES Hybrid is the Lincoln Mkz Hybrid, because it's the only one in this smaller set of larger front-wheel drive options that has an available hybrid system under the hood. The Lincoln hybrid system operates very similarly to the one in this vehicle, so they feel very much alike out on the road, but this does feel sharper, a little tauter, definitely a little newer than that Lincoln. And I also think it's a little bit more comfortable out on the road. We definitely have less road noise in this cabin, and overall it feels just a little bit more refined. That's logical, of course, because this is notably newer than the Lincoln MKZ. The MKZ is actually getting a little old these days. When it comes to our actual handling score, the ES Hybrid has an easier time of this than I think the ES 350, because the comparative set is much smaller. Therefore, I'm going to give this an A when it comes to overall handling ability, because again, keep in mind, this is as compared to that other entry, the MKZ Hybrid, and there's no Acura Hybrid or Cadenza Hybrid, etc. When it comes to our overall ride score, I'm going to give this particular model a B+, and that's because it's actually a little bit firmer than I thought it would be, and if you get the Lincoln MKZ with the adaptive suspension, which is not available on the hybrid version of the ES, then it does get a little bit softer in its comfort mode. But this is still very, very comfortable on a long highway trip. This entire segment generally tends to be. The MKZ, the Cadenza, the Buick Regal, the Lexus ES, etc. They're very comfortable vehicles for long highway drives. Also making this comfortable for a long highway drive is the extremely quiet cabin. That's another hallmark of the Lexus brand that they have continued with this generation of the ES. Now, under acceleration, we still get some of that 4-cylinder engine noise coming into the cabin, and overall, it's not as refined as the V6 version of the Lexus ES, but I think that's an acceptable trade-off for the fuel economy that we've been getting in this model. Speaking of fuel economy, we've been averaging just over 45 miles per gallon over a day of very mixed driving. That is absolutely excellent, but it is also very expected from Lexus, because the Lexus hybrid system, like the Toyota hybrid system, generally seems to get right on or over its EPA fuel economy numbers. That's a little bit different than what we see in the Lincoln. I've always had troubles getting the advertised fuel economy in that vehicle, even though the overall design of the hybrid system is actually very similar to what we see under this hood. It likely seems to be the overall implementation of that system, or perhaps the engine. The ES Hybrid is exactly what you'd expect out of a Lexus hybrid out on the road. It's comfortable, it's quiet, the performance is acceptable, and handling is actually fairly good as well. Of course, where the ES 300h really shines, though, is in its fuel economy, because this is absolutely the best gasoline-only fuel economy that you'll get in this segment. Again, as I said earlier, although some of the competition offer plug-in hybrids that will give you higher EPA ratings in their MPG score when operating as an electric vehicle, none of them will be this efficient when operating on gasoline. And again, this gets about 45 miles per gallon on regular unleaded. That's another thing worth considering. A lot of those plug-in hybrids from the competition require premium unleaded, and this doesn't. This will run regular unleaded. That means that the operational costs for this hybrid are definitely going to be lower. But you'll still be able to have a reasonable amount of fun when the road starts winding, because the ES300 still handles basically like the rest of the ES lineup, only we get better fuel economy. And this is actually one of the better large front-wheel drive sedans on sale in America when it comes to overall handling ability. Really, the Buick Regal in front-wheel drive trim, the Kia Cadenza, the Acura TLX even in front-wheel drive trim, don't have anything on the Lexus ES in terms of overall handling ability. Now, on the flip side, of course, those vehicles offer all-wheel drive, but again, not in the hybrid model, which is what we're driving right here. One of the big things we don't know about the ES yet is how much this will cost. The current generation ES starts at $38,950, and we don't expect to get pricing details until closer to the time that the ES will actually be sold, likely sometime around September or October. At the moment, the current generation ES Hybrid is about a $3,000 premium over the base ES model, and we're told to expect similar upgrade pricing for the 2019 model year. That is likely going to make it more expensive than a Lincoln Mkz Hybrid, because that starts right around $36,000. That likely means that this will be more expensive than the Lincoln Mkz Hybrid, which is the only really direct competitor to this particular model. We of course do have plug-in hybrids from the European competition, but they're very different kinds of vehicle. Again, they're considerably smaller, especially on the inside, than this Lexus ES. They're not quite the same thing either. Because again, the Lexus competitor to those models really is the Lexus IS300, which starts at $38,210. Definitely in that same range, not only as this Lexus ES, but also as those European competitors. That's the trouble with trying to compare the Lexus ES to the competition. There are very few direct competitors. With the regular ES350, you could compare this to things like the MKZ that I mentioned, the Acura TLX, the Buick Regal, or the Kia Cadenza, but only the Lincoln comes with a hybrid system available. Especially since we don't know how much the ES is actually going to cost you, you will have to wait until we can get our hands on one of these for a complete week so we can run through our usual battery of pricing and comparisons. But until then, it's safe to say that the Lexus ES has likely gone from one of the less competitive entries in this very small, unique segment to definitely one of the strongest entries. The previous generation ES at $38,950 was more expensive than a Cadenza, a Regal, a TLX, or the MKZ, and it didn't feel quite as premium as some of those options on the inside, but that's very different for this generation. This now definitely feels like the most premium entry in this segment, and we definitely have more standard equipment inside this cabin than we find in some of the competition. Now keep in mind that top-end versions of the ES are still going to cost more than top-end versions of the competition. But again, this is not quite the same thing, because this is that same kind of vehicle from a company that makes a full-line luxury lineup. At this time, we do not have a true direct competitor to a BMW 3 Series from Lincoln, from Acura, from Buick, or from Kia, but we do from Lexus. We have that Lexus IS350. So while those vehicles are compromised by trying to play to both the Lexus ES and the Lexus IS in terms of overall dynamics, feature content, price tag, etc., the Lexus ES stands alone doing its own thing. So until we get pricing information, definitely keep that in mind and definitely put the Lexus ES on your shopping list. I would also say definitely put the Kia Cadenza on your shopping list in its latest refresh if you're looking for a discount alternative to the Lexus. It's not going to be quite as nice, the performance isn't going to be quite as good, there's no hybrid available, but it is going to be less expensive, especially in mid-level trims. Now obviously it's going to have a Kia logo on the front, not a Lexus logo, but I will let all of you decide how much that is worth to you down there in the comment section below. Be sure and let me know how you feel about that. Until then, head over to facebook.com/AlexNauto so you can see what we're driving this week. Be sure to head over to patreon.com if you want to support this channel. I'll see you next week.